All right, it's exactly 8 minutes past the hour midnight. So no longer good evening, but good morning. Wherever you're watching us from, this is live, rolling coverage of Ballot 2017. Lillian, I think it's time for us to head on out.
Yeah, it's a wrap for us here.
It's a wrap.
Yeah, but we're crossing over to Waihiga, who is at the Bomas of Kenya, the National Tallying Center, for more.
That's right. Waihiga, Mwaura, take it away. It's all yours from here.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Thank you, Jeff. And of course, good morning to you, or should I say good night as you make your way home. And for us here, we are going on with the continuous coverage of the repeat presidential poll. We are at the Bomas of Kenya, the National Tallying Center, where over the last couple of hours, a very tedious, laborious process has been going on as the commissioners have been verifying, confirming, tallying the results that they got on the scanned copies of the forms 34A and 34B with the hard copies that are being brought by returning officers to this very location. It's a slow process. You've seen them continuously walking up to those podiums and announcing results of different constituencies, going back to sit down, consult within the auditorium that is just behind us. We know that there are 8 tables in the center of that auditorium, 7 of which have been dedicated to that verification process being carried out by IEB staff. And of course, party agents are in there. They are overseeing this process. They also have access to those forms in case they want to cross-check everything. And definitely some differences from what we saw here on and after the August 8th poll. Now, to talk a little bit about what has been happening over the last 24 hours and what is happening here today, I'm joined by 2 guests, one of which is physically here with me in studio, Advocate Steve Ogolla. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't say tonight, this morning. And,
thank you.
And Gabriel Muthuma, political analyst, he will be here with us shortly. 24 hours, Steve, a long time in Kenya's politics.
Yes.
Let's talk about what has happened in Kenya, at least over the last 14 hours or so. Number one, we've seen statements by governors in at least 2 of the 4 counties where the polls were called off, stating that no polls should happen there tomorrow.
Yes.
We've seen the IBC chairperson stating that for now they have postponed the polls there indefinitely.
Yes.
We've seen protests and a very long and tedious process here at the National Tallying Center. Your take on the events of the last couple of hours?
Well, I think it's been a difficult moment, but I think IBC has made a pragmatic decision, to postpone further those elections, although now we must explore both the consequences of such postponement, because now IBC has limited time in terms of declaration of the ultimate winner of the president-elect, because that now can only go beyond a certain level. IBC can't go beyond the 1st of November in terms of declaring who is the winner in this election. So I think because of the tension in Kisumu, Homa Bay, Migori, Siaya counties, and the people saying they don't want to be involved in that vote, I don't think IBC would have insisted in progressing with the vote. That would have been ill-advised, because then the people, sometimes the way part of our natural human frailties, logically you may have expected that, okay, if you don't want to participate, then just stay away and let IBC open. But I think because the elections are also emotive, people don't want to be associated with ballot boxes and ballot papers. So to tell them to use a reasonable man's logic in an emotive question is sometimes perhaps to require too much. So I think when the people said that we do not want to participate in this election, so don't open the ballot boxes, don't bring the polling
IBC staff have also faced a challenge accessing those polling stations as well.
IBC staff also, they're also fearful because they maybe have been attacked, maybe perhaps also if IBC were to progress. So I hope the people are aware about the consequences of not requiring an election.
What are some of the potential consequences? I know that's one of the questions many of our viewers must be asking. What is the way forward in those 4 counties? What are the potential ways in which the IBC can give direction? What we know for now is they say they've postponed indefinitely,
yes,
but they must talk about this before the 1st of September, before the 1st of November.
Well, I think the most obvious consequence is that these people now will not get an opportunity to vote for the president before the declaration of such. That is what IBC was intending to achieve, to give each and every person an equal opportunity to have a say in the election of the president. But now, since the people have basically said we don't want to participate, so the first and obvious consequence is that now you lose out on that opportunity. Number 2, it's also a huge relief on IBC's part, because a textual analysis of Article 138 of Article 2, I know we spoke about this earlier, requires that election of president be conducted in each and every constituency. without
And that is when there is more than one
yes,
presidential candidate.
Yes. If you have more than one presidential candidate, as we do now have 8 presidential candidates on paper, on the ballot, although
Even though one withdrew. And
Raila is on record as having withdrawn.
Yes.
But we have more than one. That meant that IBC needed to conduct election in each and every constituency. If the polling stations were opened, for instance, and there was a peaceful boycott and nobody interfered with the election officials and nobody turned up, that would have posed a serious legal challenge, which now IBC does not have to ponder about. The challenge would have been because it's not a cancelled election, it's not a postponed election, but you don't have result in that constituency. I don't think IBC would have been able to declare the results of the presidential election if one constituency did not vote at all, yet the polling opened. But now, that is not the situation that we have. What we have here is a postponed election. If you check the law, Section 55B of the Elections Act, it provides a two-step standard. It says if there is tension or maybe a national disaster, or the prevailing situation is not peaceful as to conduct an election, IBC may use its discretion to postpone an election in that area now, and then conduct it at a future date. Now, that future date is based also on 2 requirements. Number one, that the election should be conducted at the earliest practicable time. So we saw IBC trying to propose today.
Yes, today. Today, now, that's right.
Today was truly the earliest time, but it was not the earliest practicable time. Then the second test now, which IBC will have to examine, is that of whether the results that are already in can be affected by the results that would have come from the areas that have not been that haven't voted.
So do you think that IBC will then wait until they verified all the results before giving the way forward in those 4 counties?
Yes,
is that wisdom?
Yes. So in terms of now actioning, now balancing the law and reality,
yes,
IBC will have to tally, verify, determine, and then now determine the results that have come in, and then ask itself, what is the statistics are showing us that those 4 counties cumulatively have about 2.5 million votes. IBC would have to make a decision. These 2.5 million votes, supposing that they were cast in favor of one of the candidates, would they close the gap between the leading candidate? So if there's an assailable lead, then IBC can call the election. That's one thing. So I think from the figures we saw today, Uhuru Kenyatta soaring beyond, at that time it was around 6 million?
Yes.
Over 6 million votes?
Yes.
So if you make that charitable assumption that the 2.5 million, let's say people were to cast in favor of Raila or maybe Kuru,
or one of the other
candidates,
candidates,
other than Kuru, I don't think that would have still closed the gap. So I see IBC progressing to announce the results without those 4 counties.
Okay. We've actually seen a case in court today, not quite sure of its progress, by Starehe MP Charles Jagwa. He moved to the court seeking to have IBC ordered to declare the presidential results without results from those 4 counties where the election was supposed to take place tomorrow. What does the law say in such a situation? And is he moving a case to court that might be obvious? What's your take on that?
Jagwa should not be pedantic. IBC has not expressed any challenges in terms of declaration of results. And there is no delay.
Even though it is his constitutional right as well, wouldn't you say that?
I mean, he has a right, everybody has a right to move to court, but moving to court should also be based upon some advice. I believe that petition was drafted by a lawyer. A lawyer, you have an unqualified obligation to provide sound legal advice, including the timing of filing a petition. So I think if you file a petition when IBC is still within the time for announcement, that petition is premature and the court is unable to work on it. I think that petition by Jagwa, in short, is also dead on arrival insofar as IBC has not violated any law in terms of the law of declaration of results. IBC does not need to be guided, to be directed by the court at this point on how to make announcement about the presidential election results.
Okay,
so that's premature. It's a premature litigation.
Okay, that is how you see it. Let's talk about what IBC have been going through for the better part of the day, verification of results. Yes. We've seen a different process from what we saw on August 8th and thereafter. We've seen an attempt, and some feel that IBC are trying to make amends for the nullification of the August 8th poll and what the Supreme Court gave us, things that needed to have happened for the August 8th poll to have been seen as valid. Do you, from what you've observed, is that convincing enough? And can we say that moving forward, Kenyans can expect in elections that verification will be a slow, laborious process? Remember, we are seeing a very slow process here for only one contest, the presidential contest.
Yes.
What impact will this have for the 2022 election and moving forward?
One, it won't have any impact because the results that are transmitted to the National Tallying Center are only presidential election results. But I think, yeah, it's now painfully slow. I think this election is not hotly contested. People can reasonably expect that President Uhuru Kenyatta will have an unassailable win and an easy win. But so people are not able to feel, the pains of waiting. And I think that's where let Kenyans use this opportunity to induct themselves into the reality that IBC usually has 7 days to verify, determine, and declare results. Now, I think this is a significant improvement from the 8th August election in terms of management, because the Supreme Court said, in fact, when IBC Chebukati himself went back to the Supreme Court for direction, the court said you must verify. So all the results. So the procedure for verification is this: IBC must receive all the electronically transmitted results from 34As from the polling stations and from 34B for that constituency.
That's right.
And IBC must then wait for the returning officers to physically deliver the forms from 34As and from 34B. From 34B.
That's right.
So once the returning officer has brought all this, I guess there's going to be there's a desk somewhere there for, let's say, if this is Westlands constituency, this is Langata constituency. Let's say for Langata constituency, so you'd expect 116 polling station results in one stack, and then on top of it you have the one from 34B for Langata physically delivered, and then you have the electronic copies. Then now they would go through each and every copy. Polling station results.
Agents are also on hand just
checking to be sure that there was no alteration or falsification from the time the results were announced from the polling station. That really does take time. And then now coming to communicate, I like the idea of communicating constituency per constituency. It gives parties agents an opportunity.
You applaud what we've been seeing for
to
the better
raise
part
questions
of this
on that constituency itself. You get, and IBC is required itself also as what they have not done so far. So we can only assume that there is no discrepancy now. But the Supreme Court said when IBC posed that question again, what does verification mean? Does it mean we can alter? The Supreme Court said IBC has a duty to communicate to the public that, listen, these are the forms, the electronic results the electronically transmitted results that we received from 34As, and now from the physically received from 34As. Now, when you verify them, we've seen a discrepancy of this amount of figures in respect of these polling stations, so that the public and also candidates can organize themselves and see whether they want to use those discrepancies to assess how it affects their results, and whether they want to use them to file an election petition. Then the Form 34B, what was electronically transmitted and what was physically delivered. If the totals have a variation, IBC is also required to communicate that. So far, they haven't done that.
Yes.
So we can only assume that up to now, the constituencies they have verified don't have any kind of
40 by the last count. Although that number could have changed.
Yes. So we can assume that the first 40 are okay.
Okay.
That there's no mismatch between electronically transmitted results and also what is physically delivered.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's remind our viewers at home the threshold of winning a presidential election. We have parameters like 50% plus one.
Yes.
We know there's a certain percentage needed from at least a certain number of constituencies. Some also wondering, is it a question of simple majority? Walk us through what the law says about the threshold of a repeat presidential poll, because this is a situation that Kenya has never quite found itself in before.
Yes. I think this election, the threshold is set in Article 138, sub-Article 4. It says every candidate must garner 50% plus one of the total votes cast. I saw some people expressing concern because there's a low voter turnout. Does it mean that people will get 50% plus one? And what is this 25%? So it is 50% plus one of the total votes cast, not of the registered number of voters.
Okay.
So if the total votes cast in this special election, let's say, is 8 million, then it's just 50% plus one of that 8 million.
So even if only 1 million Kenyans went to the polls, it doesn't matter.
Yes, it doesn't matter really.
Okay.
Then the second leg of that requirement is that the winning candidate must garner 25% in at least 24 counties. So it could be 25% or even just 10% voter turnout in that county.
Okay.
So if you take, for example, Kitui, let's say Kitui, I think Kitui was being reported to have had a 14% voter turnout.
A low voter turnout.
A low at
absolutely.
14%. So it's 25% of that 14%. So I saw people raising concern that now that it's just 14%, how will you get 25%? So it's not. It's the 25% is calculated from the voters that have turned out to vote, from the votes cast. So there are two different levels of analysis. The analysis of 14% voter turnout, that is in contradistinction with or comparison to compare and contrast the registered number of voters in that county and the people that actually came out to vote. But when you're computing the threshold for declaring a winner, you use the actual votes cast. Then you say, do you have 25% of these votes cast? So IBC will tell us if there's someone who has matched that requirement, then that is the person that will be declared. Of course, if nobody gets that requirement, I think Kenyans need to know. The law says, Article 138 sub Article 5 says that you take the first two candidates for what we call a runoff. So we could expect, let's say, for instance, Uhuru, who is leading, and maybe again Raila Odinga, although we hope there'll be time to discuss the consequence of putting Raila at the ballot when he had withdrawn. But for purposes of demonstration, we could use Raila and Uhuru now going for a runoff, again by law, you get. So if there's no clear winner,
yes, if
in terms of 50% plus one, and in terms of 25% in 24 counties. Now, we go for a runoff, and then now in a runoff, now it's just a simple win. It's not more or less like the first past the post.
Okay.
So
Simple majority.
Yeah, simple majority. Anybody, like all the votes cast, don't bother about the counties. Just count.
Okay.
And see which votes have been who has garnered the highest votes, and that is the person to be declared president.
Okay. I guess there's no time like the president for you to. And I can see that Gabriel is here with us. I hope he can join us on set as soon as he's ready. Please bring him on. I guess there's no time like the president for you to weigh in your thoughts on Raila's inclusion onto the ballot paper. You said that we need to look at that from a legal perspective as well. But before we get to that, let's take a look at what's happening in the auditorium. We continue monitoring the process there, even as verification continues. Again, quite a slow process. It was launched by the chairperson of IEBC, Wafula Chebukati, earlier today, and we have seen periodically commissioners, Boyagolu, also the chairperson did it at some point, walking up to the podium, announcing results of a particular constituency, announcing total number of registered voters, result per presidential candidate, total number of valid votes cast, total number of rejected votes, and then going back to consult and coming back with fresh results from other constituencies as well. We're not sure whether this process will go into the night or whether they might take a break at some point, allow everyone in there to go and get some rest, and then resume in the morning. We'll continue monitoring the situation here and let you know. But if you just joined us, you're watching Citizen TV's continuous coverage of the repeat presidential election. We are live from the Bomas of Kenya, the National Tallying Center, where we monitor the situation, even as a lot of attention moves from the constituencies and counties to this location, where sometime either over this weekend or next week, the chairperson will announce the complete results of this repeat poll. And what happens after that is one of the questions that I'll be posing to you. Is the Supreme Court still an option for anyone who feels aggrieved? And I'll be coming to my panelists here to talk a bit about that. Let me introduce Gabriel Muthuma, political analyst. Welcome to the program this morning. Good morning. I think it's where I should start this conversation.
Thank you, Waihiga. Yesterday I made a very crazy mistake. I came in a suit. That's why I'm wondering. You guys are freezing, man. I said I won't make that mistake again. It was actually freezing.
So you're looking at us and you understand the circumstances with which we are here at this hour.
Trust you me.
Well, we trust that the conversation will keep us warm.
I hope it does.
Gabriel, busy last 24 hours.
It has been.
Protests in different parts of the country. Governors in 2 counties saying, listen, do not have elections here, I guess today.
Unfortunately,
we've seen IBC chairperson Wafula Chebukati indefinitely postponing the polls there. We've seen different moves from different parties as well. Your take on the state of the nation at this moment?
Let me first begin by thanking you for allowing me to come this early morning. Many people are like, what are you going to do there? But anyway, I think we have a duty, Waihiga. And the duty that we have is to explain to our viewers and those people probably who may not know that there is an element of democracy when you exercise a boycott. it is indeed okay for me and you and Wakili here to say, you know what, on this one we are not going to show up, and that is actually guided in our constitution. But a boycott and a disruption are two different animals. The minute you disrupt that process, you're actually committing an electoral offense. For a governor to come out and say, in this county there will be no election, it's not a boycott anymore. He's saying it will not happen. I'm going to do all I can to ensure that it does not happen. You must resort to one of these three things. Number one...
Although in all fairness, we know governors who are calling on the IBC not to hold the poll. Are you quoting a specific governor?
First of all, it's not only governors. We started out, there were even MPs who have actually been actually roughed up a little bit for actually creating some element of mayhem. Some of them were actually captured on our broadcasts, saying that, you know, we will make sure that the materials will not arrive here. That is an electoral offense, and that's what I'm saying. You must do several things, and what I can guess at this point are only three. Number one is to ensure that you create a hostile environment, like what we are seeing. Number two is to ensure that whoever shows up to vote in that element of hostility, you know, is not given a reception, a peaceful reception. Number three is to ensure the materials for electioneering do not show up, as we have seen. Those are electoral offenses. That is not a boycott, that is a disruption of the electoral process. So it is good for people to understand that yes, you can boycott the process and leave it as is. But the minute you start putting and injecting an element of uneasiness, of ensuring that people don't come out to vote, you are actually, you know, encouraging an electoral malpractice.
In terms of electoral malpractices, you coming out clear that you've seen instances that have even been broadcast on traditional media, etc. Why do you think the authorities have not swung into action? Why do you think no one has moved to make a complaint publicly, formally, before the authorities?
I saw some people were actually caught. There was a scuffle with lights of Boni Khalwale. I saw Raila's sister also, you know, got into a scuffle. There was Kano, the governor of Siaya, who actually was in a scuffle with the police. Waihiga, let's not cheat ourselves. We saw when IBC were trying to conduct the exercise in those counties, we saw tents that were actually being torn apart. So that's what I'm calling about. It is a sphere. You create a hostile environment to ensure that this does not take place. And actually, we've seen the fruits of it. Roads getting barricaded so people don't come out to vote. Actually, a near threat that if you go out to vote, you've just heard, even though we cannot confirm, that within the slums of Nairobi, where people are going from door to door, you know, checking on fingers, on the paint, on the voting paint, you know, if I may call it, or the color on your nail, whether it's the mark rather, once you have voted, that mark, whether you have it or not, and that is profiling. It should not be happening. It is wrong. It is wrong, and this is the time that leaders must be seen to be leaders. This is actually why they were called by that name. If you are a Mheshimiwa, you must live up to this name. This is the time you come out and actually castigate such. I was so happy today when I saw Raila at Olympic Primary School, when he was talking against the vandalism, the destruction. That was a very good effort, and I congratulate him. I commend him for that. That is what we want to see. And as a matter of fact, he went a little bit ahead to say that he will do what he must do to ensure that that damage is actually repaired. And that's a very good thing coming from a leader. It is actually sending a picture. Hey, we are actually against this, even though we are talking about a boycott, but we know we are not going to allow the destruction of property. And that should actually seep in, that should go through the heads of the youths of this nation who are being misused by politicians to actually drive the damages that we are seeing in our schools. Oh. It is not acceptable.
Okay, Steve, I know you wanted to come in as well. Go ahead.
Well, I think there are two issues. One, Gabriel has really captured it very well. The other one, he has not. What is
in your opinion, he has not? Okay, he'll respond to that. Go ahead.
What is happening is this. You saw Raila in the last rally telling his supporters to observe peace, to stay at home.
Right.
And you see, there's a sense in which NASA is also not in control of all their supporters. And there's no assurance that if IBC progressed to the vote, that there would be a peaceful boycott, going by the events of yesterday and part of today.
So NASA leaders can call for peace, but actually, what happens on the ground?
So actually,
okay, go ahead.
So actually, it's possible that the governors feeling the pulse of the people was more or less being helpful and telling IBC that those election officers risk their lives if they come in, because we are not going to be, we are unable to control them. That's beneficial, but also, and I think that if IBC captured it in that manner, that's okay. But also, that is not to say that within the law, someone is required to speak emphatically and say there's not going to be an election in this area. That for sure should be investigated by the ODPP and arrests made and arraigned in court. I hope the people that were making that decision, such announcements, they were aware about the consequences, because in my view, the preventing an election to occur is more harmful than it is beneficial, for whatever reason. But before we come back to that, IBC itself is required not to make independent assessment. The law requires IBC to make independent assessment and not to listen.
If I can interrupt you, just put your... let me assist you.
Sorry,
sir.
Sorry about that. Secure it under your...
Oh, my...
Just, sorry, bear with us.
New technology, new technology.
Who are watching. Are you comfortable now? Have another go at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. IBC, the law requires IBC to make an independent assessment. And IBC is not required to respond to political threats or demands or by other by sections of the political actors. IBC, I believe, they made an independent assessment of the environment where they are going to conduct the election. The law says that if there's a climate of fear, that climate of fear could still be, that assessment, we could still get there even without the pronouncements by the governors, right? So I think insofar as IBC decision was concerned, I believe they were guided by the law and not by the political rhetoric that we saw. But those statements, for purposes of record, I think it would be better to restate that it's an offense to intimidate election officials, to make insightful comments that whip emotions against, that may make people then feel energized that yes, if they come here tomorrow, we must decide because the leaders have said so. I think today there's a bit of a variation from what Raila said, when they had their own rally, because they said, stay at home, go to church, don't mind IBC. Today we saw leaders coming out more forcefully saying, don't come.
Telling IBC, don't come.
So we will have to review the context in which those statements were made. Why are they making those statements as people who feel the pulse of the community and therefore just acting as a soundboard, issuing an advisory to IBC, or there are people that were actually, the leaders are the people that were responsible for whipping those emotions and creating that climate of fear. If they are the people that were responsible for creating the climate of fear, then I agree with Muthuma that there's a case to answer by those elected leaders who made such statements. But most importantly, I don't know whether NASA communicated to their constituency the intended benefits. And of course...
Intended benefits of what?
Of the intended benefits of not participating in this election, and in what manner. Because there are two different pathways. The benefits would have been better to NASA if their supporters stayed at home.
Right.
The policies were opened and nobody went there to vote.
So empty pictures on TV of just
right.
empty polling stations,
because,
no activity happening.
Yes, because if you create a climate of fear that the election officials are unable to conduct the election, the benefit goes to IBC. It says that IBC was willing to conduct the election. The environment was hostile, so the law allows IBC to postpone. When IBC postpones an election, IBC can actually now progress to announce declare the winner of that election without your participation. I don't think that was the intended benefit, that they should help IBC to declare Uhuru Kenyatta the winner. I think the other way of a peaceful boycott, in my view, and it would have been a serious legal question, lawyers would have debated it on end, and it would have found itself in the Supreme Court itself. The question of Article 138 of Article 2, which says that where you have more than two candidates, election must be conducted at the constituency. Now, it would not have been an easy explanation the way we are saying now insofar as the election has been postponed. If IBC, let's say this is a Langata constituency, if IBC opened all the polling stations
and nobody made their way there to vote,
and the people went about their business, they went to church, the way Raila said, go to church and maybe stay at home,
carry out your business, whatever that may be.
Let me tell you, Waihiga, it would have been a difficult task for Mr. Chebukati sitting here at Bomas to declare the winner of the presidential election when one constituency has not returned the results. Because the result of an election, according to Black's Law Dictionary, is the total of ballot votes cast in an election. the proper definition is that of ballots, results of an election is account of ballots cast in an election. So you must, for it to have results, you couldn't say 0 results. You needed to have ballots cast, and then now you count them. That is the legal definition of election result.
So what happens when no ballots have been
when
cast?
When there are no results to declare, no ballots have been cast, then no election has taken place in that constituency. It would have been a very difficult position, but I think now that anxiety has been vacated thanks to NASA boycott. If
Section 55B
had they stayed home quietly, they would have watched a serious legal challenge emerging and maybe to have been resolved in their favor.
Okay.
The courts would have held that actually there was no election.
Gabriel,
In fact, to a large extent, I agree with what Wakili is saying.
Okay.
And I thought actually that would have been ideal. If I was to strategize such a move, that's exactly what I would actually fervently push. And I would say, you know what? Allow it to happen, because you have actually vitalized Jubilee in this sense. They are saying, look at the numbers that we have at this point. We are nearing 7 point something, even though unconfirmed. And we still had unverified. We had all these uncertainties in all these so many areas, but people still came out. IBC opened shop in about 43 counties. All right, so you're actually giving them vitality to say, imagine if we had a clear rein to allow IEBC to conduct this election, what would we have done with these numbers? Now, talking about the numbers themselves, it is true again that IEBC at this point, I don't really see any logical variance that would hold them actually from calling the winner. I mean, NASA, they've had actually fervently said, we have boycotted this election. So go ahead and do what you may. If you're looking at the only 4 counties that we are talking about that did not, go into this functionality, then that just tells you, I don't think there's anything that will change. And then again, like I said, if logic does not suffice, then apply common sense. You can look at, how many numbers, and so many people have actually been racking those numbers. These 4 counties, they represent this number of registered voters. Even if we go 100%, will it reach,
one of the candidates,
exactly. Would it make any difference? So I think at this point, I would actually go, even though I know it can be a legal tussle if they go ahead and do that. Probably IBC wants to make sure that they don't do as many blunders as they did in August 8th. So I give them the time. And Waihiga, I think we had this conversation before, where we were reminding IEBC, take your time. You have legal mandate. I mean, you have days. Exhaust those days. And if they would go back to August 8th, they would have actually probably exhausted the 7 days that they are allowed. Don't be in such a hurry. Make sure that everything is in order. You saw the issue in Kandara, where I'm just seeing that from downloaded, and the area MP was actually almost entering into a fist fight with one of the ROs, and and the RO was like, no, this is how it will go. Gives us the first actually clear case of how the court now will interpret that particular entry, where you can see actually it is a glaring mistake. But what will happen? You cannot change the law, and this is what I'm liking with some of the laws that we have. It actually defines and it actually spells out clearly the minor case that what is announced at the constituency level remains, and the only person who has the powers to change that is the court of law. So Waihiga, I think here we have a clear disparity where we must ask ourselves, have we run a credible election? And as much as we want to speculate at this point, we just have to wait and see, because there's a question that you asked, a Supreme Court going to be included in this environment. I can almost nearly guarantee that people will start making headway to the Supreme Court. It is a matter of wait and see.
We actually received a report today. Okia Omtata has moved to
the
Supreme Court
to nullify
to have the election nullified. He declared, among other things, that there were no nominations with a call for a fresh presidential poll. He also spoke about Raila withdrawing, and that needed to be looked into as well. And that's something we wanted to allude to. Go ahead, Steve.
But maybe just the reason why IBC has not declared the winner is because they're still verifying. I don't think now, when you postpone, then the law says you can go ahead and now declare the winner. what is going unattended, I don't think, although IBC was saying that the election is postponed to a future date, there is never going to be a future date.
No.
In your view?
Because this, actually, Waihiga, let me just throw a spanner in the works.
I like
In
that.
my own view, fresh elections needed to have its own regulations and its own complementary laws, which we don't have. So we are latching on to what looks like the nearest provision, which is Section 55B. A textual analysis of that law does not, and then you compare it with the stream we have now. IBC, that provision says IBC should conduct that election at a future date. So we saw IBC trying to innovate within that challenge and putting it today. But so that it can be within this the remaining few days in the deadline before 1st of November. But what IBC should have communicated with clarity, and I hope they have an opportunity to state that again tomorrow to Kenyans, there is never going to be another election in those counties. That after the 1st of November, you won't have an opportunity to conduct another election. That won't be an election within the purview of what is envisioned under Article 140.
The call by NASA leader Raila Odinga for elections in 19.
No, I'm talking about the council,
the four counties in
the 4 counties. The initial election has been postponed.
Go ahead.
Fact is this: that election will not happen at all. IBC is not allowed to conduct it beyond 1st of November. Now, from the days that we have, IBC is also pressed for time. It's required by law, not out of convenience, by law to declare results if it believes that the remaining votes would not have, the areas that have not voted, even had they voted, would not have altered the results.
Right.
So that is settled. Now, the question about, if we now transition to what, let's say post-declaration, I see there are 3 scenarios, and I think one we've already discussed. One is where we have the outright winner, within the framing of Article 138, sub-Article 4, in terms of 50% plus 1, and in terms of 25% in 4 counties. When that winner is declared, of course, if there is no winner, we go for that runoff. So that's the first pathway. That is a predictable pathway post-declaration. Now, the second pathway is that the results are announced, when a president-elect is declared, someone is unhappy, you go to court. Article 143 requires that if the court will again examine that petition in the usual manner in which this petition was examined, that means that all these petitions that have been filed before declaration of results are not yet ripe for litigation, and either they're only fit for dismissal. I think they will not succeed. These petitions will have to be re-examined. They have to be filed afresh after the declaration of results. Because if you're filing a petition before IBC declares the president-elect, the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction to intervene in an ongoing election and saying stopping an ongoing. They can't. By law, they're not allowed to do that.
Until the results are...
The results have to be declared.
Final result.
Then you must now frame. Are you testing the credibility of the electoral process? Now you must frame the issues where you think if you think there's fraud and falsification, then you must then present that case and adduce evidence, and the court will examine it in the usual manner. There is the other question whether this election ought to have happened in the first place because of Raila's withdrawal. Let me tell you, the law is not clear in terms of whether the Supreme Court now has the jurisdiction to entertain that question. Because after the declaration of results, and my own view is that the Supreme Court does not have that kind of jurisdiction to examine the question whether this election ought to have happened or not. It can only challenge the process of conducting this election and the ultimate results that have been declared. But whether this election ought to have happened or not is a matter that should have been canvassed before the election. I think someone may raise a preliminary objection if that issue is brought before court, because what you're saying is that Raila ought not to have been in the ballot. Raila ought not have been in the ballot. I agree. That question poses a serious legal and constitutional question, because fact is this: at the time Raila was withdrawing, the only law known in place was the Supreme Court 2013 decision that said if you withdraw, the elections are cancelled and fresh nominations to ensue. IBC did not activate that provision. Instead, it waited for a Kuru judgment, which then opened up the race for 8 people. I think there's also a saying that equity does not aid the indolent. You must move with speed if you want to activate a particular right. The moment Raila withdrew, it would have been desirable that NASA move to court immediately and not relying on IBC's goodwill to to interpret the law favorably.
That is what you feel that
You
they
see,
should have done.
Had they moved to court immediately to say what is now the consequence of this withdrawal, then that case would have been processed. Even if the Kuru judgment was coming, the judgment would have been stayed for a while. The implementation of the judgment would have been stayed. In fact, they would have made an application to stay the implementation of that Ekuru judgment until that question was resolved. They didn't do that. Now we have had an election. The serious challenge they must overcome is whether the Supreme Court has the jurisdiction to examine the question whether the election was properly conducted.
Okay.
Or not.
That's actually a very good legal.
I have a question for you, but I can give you a chance. Did you want to respond to him?
There was something you had mentioned. I don't know whether that's the question you wanted to ask about Raila talking about another election in 90 days.
Okay, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, in fact, that's what I wanted to say. You know,
Okay, I'll come back to you, Steve.
and I've seen Waihiga. I've seen so many people, including lawyers and professors, actually coming to media houses and blatantly talking about that very same question that you've asked. And on this one, I can talk about intellectual dishonesty. And this is something I think we've talked back to back. No one, no player is supposed to actually talk about such a rule. Not Raila Odinga and not Uhuru Kenyatta. They cannot order a date when an election will take place. We need to get this right. These are facts. They are in our constitution. The people who can do that, it's either the Supreme Court as it ordered or our constitution. These are very clear supreme documents. And I think we need to start understanding and wanting to go deep to find where truth comes from. This funny business of not wanting to forage and get to understand what does my constitution say, who is right, who actually gives this directive. It's in our constitution, and it's sometimes it's a clear aberration. We do an injustice to people who would otherwise sit down and listen to intellectuals speaking, and yet we are not giving them the right feed that they require. It's within the constitution. The people who should call this is what we saw the Supreme Court do or our constitution. It is very clear.
For the National Super Alliance, and in the build-up to that, they just hang on their view that dialogue, sitting down together between political leaders to chart a way forward could have created a way for that particular proposal, even though it might not be in the law right now. We've seen situations where Kenyans in the past have, in a sense, not gone outside the law, but managed to find a solution that isn't exactly hinged in the law at that moment.
Waihiga, I've been against that, and not in a bad way. I've been against a political dialogue outside the parentheses of the law. It is why we are here in the first place. You remember, and I've kept repeating this, you remember the political legal bypass that we did with the Hassan-led commission? We chucked people out of the office. Then we should have
even
had
the date for the previous election.
Exactly.
Changed.
Then we should, and this is the problem, we get political solutions. It is okay at times, but when you bend and you try to dissect the constitution, you end up running into a mockery like what we have now. Everybody thinks that by removing IEBC the way we did several months ago, we can go using the very same way to riot and to demonstrate and think we will achieve the same results. What if somebody who actually caved in as they did last time now says, no, do it within the functions of the law? Guess what? You are going to enter into a state like we are in today. So I am not negatively disagreeing with having a political solution, but sometimes those political solutions that we run to actually create bigger problems.
You
like
say within certain circumstances it can be considered. To you, what are those circumstances? When is a political solution necessary?
For instance, you see the sitting down of coming up with commissioners. That was one. Albeit the fact that it was not the right thing, it wasn't legal, we learned from that. Even though there was goodwill at that particular time, somebody thought the way we did back then, we can do it now. And that's why you started seeing the tear gas again.
By somebody you're referring to who? NASA leader?
I mean,
or NASA
of course,
team?
yeah,
Okay,
and that's what they said. We will go. And yet it is a provision in the Constitution how they can go about to remove people out of office, including the president himself. You can bring a motion to Parliament and Senate. We have machineries, we have legal avenues to remove governors from office, senators and MPs. All right, albeit the fact that it's time consuming, but we have those avenues. So it is sometimes erroneous when we take a political solution thinking that it can work in each and every environment. And that is why now you're seeing somebody saying and blatantly saying another election in 90 days. As who? Clearly.
Okay, Steve, come in.
Actually cut me short because I was going to come to that point. I remember I said there are three issues.
Go ahead, I can give you the chance now.
There are three issues post-declaration. There are three broad issues. And I already discussed the first two. The first is that we have a clear winner, and if there's no clear winner, there's a runoff, and then that gives us a winner. The second one is that there's a clear winner, people are disputing the win, you file an election petition. Now, the election petition says that you challenge the election of the president-elect. So that's why I posed the challenge of the inclusion of Raila there. You know, you have to overcome the question of jurisdiction, whether the court has that kind of jurisdiction now. But the third and most critical issue is the legitimacy question. You see, I think legitimacy will probably become more clearer once you've seen the figures, the percentages of voter turnout, because if you have a critical section of the country who have not come out to vote for the president, then will he be able to effectively govern? I think the challenge now that the president will have is coordinating government, you know, because to govern requires that everybody must be co-opted in the ideal of governance and say, yes, we recognize the president. The legality of this election is not a doubt, and therefore the legal legitimacy of, let's say now, I mean, you can just call it Uhuru's presidency because he's poised to win this election, going by the figures. And if he overcomes the first two challenges, he's going to be sworn in. Once he's sworn in, the discussion will change. The Constitution says that you are sworn in for a term of 5 years. So I think then that answers a part of the 90-day period. There is not an opportunity in law to have another election within 90 days. You get? For us to be able to have an election in 90 days, it must be that the political opposition that boycotted the election are able through craft to make to make governance an impossible task, so that the president has to reflect, do I really want to continue like this? You know, and how NASA will do that, for instance. I mean, they must be. It's a very cautious and delicate approach because you'll be somewhere. You'll be walking between a thin line between the rule of law and operating outside the law. You know, it's a very delicate, because if you, and I would want to encourage them again, not to borrow. You see now what the cancellation of this election goes against Raila's own wish, because he said let there be a peaceful boycott. Now, if NASA, for instance, wanted to have an election in 90 days, they must appeal to the moral consciousness of Uhuru Kenyatta. Because in law, I know that's a very difficult thing to do. In law, once someone is sworn in, unless they resign, in which case even if you resign, the deputy president must take over. Right. So you need some kind of unity of a conference of thought between the president and the deputy, saying, let us all of us resign. That possibility is very thin. If Uhuru and Ruto pull let's say a Chiloba on NASA again, where they stay put because they have been sworn in to serve for a term of 5 years, no amount of political agitation or demonstrations can displace them from that office. But if, for instance, NASA wanted to innovate within these challenges that they have, because the challenge they have is that how do you anchor 90 days in law? 90 days in law, that figure is not anywhere in post-election mechanism, you know, political discussion or legal discussion, because the legal forum is that either the election is nullified again and then you go back to a fresh election, or the election is upheld, the president is sworn in, and then he starts serving a 5-year term. Now, there are issues that NASA raised in their last rally. I think what Raila spoke about, the 5 issues. It's a very delicate balance. If NASA, for instance, let me isolate the issue of picketing. What happened, let's say, for instance, in Ukraine in 2004, November 2004, all the way up to January 2005, which forced Viktor Yanukovych, who was then the president, had the main opposition of Viktor Yushchenko, yes. Viktor Yushchenko had said that Yanukovych had interfered with the electoral process, he had manipulated it in his favor, and they didn't recognize the results. So they said this was a sham election. They staged a sit-in for 2 months, what is called the Orange Revolution, and for every day people went to the city square and they sat there, you know, peacefully, until it was not possible for Yanukovych to continue governing, and another election had to be conducted. Now, in Kenya, is NASA able to just say we will hold peaceful, bloodless, non-violent protests, or just sitting in the CBD or whatever, so that the order of government is effectively affected or significantly impaired, that Uhuru can say, okay, fine, I know I won, but because of this deepening political crisis, I will probably let's just make a decision between Ruto and myself, Uhuru Kenyatta, to go back the ballot. If Uhuru is not willing to make that decision, you can force it. You will have and NASA does not have a superior right to force a situation where they say you must make that decision. You see, the same way you are picketing to require that there be election in 90 days, the other person will also say, but now I'm in this office by virtue of the law. Election was nullified on 1st of September. Election was conducted in 60 days. People went to court. The court upheld my election. So I have the legality of this election is not in doubt, and I have the legal legitimacy also. I may not have the broad political legitimacy because a critical section or my main competitor did not participate, but that's a right that he also exercised. So in my view, I'm now serving a 5-year term. Let's discuss how to build national cohesion, preserve national tranquility, law and order. Let us see what kind of political settlement we may have as a country, and I think Uhuru had indicated that he's willing to reach a trial. The kind of discussion that they will have will certainly not reach a level where they'll have an election in 90 days. If the only way to have an election in 90 days, Uhuru Kenyatta himself, he must resign again from the presidency.
Which
Uhuru and Ruto, they must resign, because if he resigns alone, the law says the deputy president takes over for the remaining term. If they don't resign,
briefly,
the other way, which I think lowers lots of challenge in court, if the political elite conspire to amend the constitution. Amending the constitution,
by political elite, you're talking about legislators.
I'm talking about both wings, Jubilee and NASA wings. If they decide, okay, fine, let's have a middle ground and let's amend the constitution so that we are able to go. Because I don't see in law the opportunity to go back to an election. You must reference it in the law. So unless they are amending the constitution, that may require a referendum, which is a more difficult issue to achieve. So basically, the reality is this: what a Kuru judgment did to Raila, it destabilized the NASA strategy.
I agree.
Effectively, it can only be compared to what the Supreme Court judgment did to Uhuru, because he thought he had a win, then he walked out on 1st of September without a win.
And he had to accept it.
I know there has to be some reality checks and some practical sense adjustments on what is achievable and what is not achievable.
I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt because our time is almost up, but I need to get one or two more questions in. Gabriel, let me come to you. Right. Should IBC announce President Uhuru Kenyatta, which for now looks like the way things will happen, and then someone moves to the Supreme Court, would you say that the circumstances by which NASA moved to the Supreme Court after the August 8th poll, if you compare with how IBC has conducted the election this time around and the environment we find ourselves in, has the environment changed? Would the case that you take to the Supreme Court now be different? Let's talk a bit about that.
The environment has changed in two ways. Let me begin by the first one, which we all agree, the hostile that we saw in various parts of the country. I don't think that was witnessed in August. But also something that I've noted with IBC, even though so many people have come out to castigate IBC and call this exercise a sham. And I remember we had a broadcast where I was telling people we don't have the right to call it a sham. If it's a sham, let it go through the whole cycle. Let it go to Supreme Court. They will look at it and say if it was a sham. They are the ones to decide. It is like me telling Wakili, you are not intelligent or you are not wise to tell me this decision. But when he stands in front of a judge and loses a case, as intelligent as he is, will I say that he's a sham judge or he's a sham wakili? No. He may have all what it takes. Exactly. No, I'm just giving an example. Go ahead. Because that's the argument we had. And I was telling people, when you say, people who are running this affair are not intelligent, then actually I think you're doing them a disservice. Let's give them what it takes. Let them run it. What I've noticed with IBC at this time is that they are a little bit careful. The fact that we have now scanned forms coming in, and honestly, Waihiga, if actually we had gone this way, forget about the text. This captures everything that we are seeing. Okay, and I was telling people, and I've been encouraging people, it is a simple process. We are just convoluting a very simple process with USSID numbers. I don't know what text comes in. I don't know what. You have 7 days, and that is actually what I had been telling IEBC.
Take your time.
Use those 7 days. You've been assigned those days for a reason. Don't rush. And you may remember that election night, among the few things that started getting people jittery was the 2 hours where they went almost, it was almost like a blackout, no numbers coming. You started hearing what political leaders started saying. What are you doing? Are you cooking numbers? It has been enshrined in our mentalities that every time something is not working, something is cooking. Guess what? Let me give you another example that I saw, something very minute, Waihiga, where somebody, and this was during when people are registering, and this I'm just giving you an example of how things, how we reason as people. Somebody spilled a soda on one of the keyboards. This was some time back when people are registering. And guess what? The lines are not moving as they were moving. And people thought there was something which was happening. And I was like, what would be happening? We are so quick to judge an effort, and that is what I think we did in August. So to IBC, I think IBC, what I'm seeing, the change that I'm seeing is that they are being a little bit cautious. Even what they are talking about. Yesterday, I saw Chairman Kebukati send a tweet.
What impact will
that tweet actually break? That tweet you saw.
Yes.
So it actually created. Everyone was like, "What is this guy talking about?"
Because so many people contradicted a statement he made.
And so many people rushed
right
to him
here.
and said, "Hang on a minute, my friend. Take your time. Take your time." And I'm liking what I'm seeing. Let him know that he has been given the time and he needs to use it. So apart from the small skirmishes, I don't want to call them the small skirmishes because they are still continuing to happen. Apart from that, I think the legitimacy,
and people have lost their lives as well.
the legitimacy of this process has actually been vouched by the numbers that we are continuing to see. And again, as much as we would like to talk about those numbers, we must remember that they are still provisional. They have not been, it's an ongoing process. So we have to wait and see.
Gabriel, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you. Opponents of not yesterday's election, now the election of the day before yesterday,
yes,
could say that Dr. Kombe's revelations, are part of the reason why they would seek to call the election a sham. Others would say that the statement by the chairperson a day after Dr. Kombe resigned also could have raised questions. They say that between that statement by the chairperson and the revelations by Dr. Kombe, that could be proof in court. And they've also raised the question of the 12 billion plus that has been used in this election as well.
Dr. Akombe never called it a sham. I never had her call it a sham. Said it was hard to say whether or not it would be a credible
and she asked for it to be
election.
She asked
yes. But let us look at the substance and the content. Sometimes Waihiga, that's what I was saying. If we jump over too much, then we will miss the entire picture. What am I talking about? She actually talked about facts, some of the few things that we are witnessing. She said, we have gone to court as a commission. We have lost almost all the cases that we've presented at the court, at the courts. Yes. Fact. Secondly, my staff are receiving threats. They cannot even go, we are concerned about putting them in harm's way. Fact. As we have seen. Secondly and thirdly, she goes on to claim that the August 8th election was credible. In fact, it passed the threshold of being called credible. She then goes on to say that there is one candidate who has already. That's what she said. That's what she said. Am I right? No. She mentioned that. She said in August they carried. No, that's what she said. On August they carried they conducted. And somebody asked, and remember it was Jeff who actually asked Akombe that question. What would you say about the August election? And he said the August election was credible as far as they were concerned, was quite credible. That's what she said. And I'm actually quoting her verbatim. And you can dust those tapes and you'll be able to see.
Okay, right? Steve, Scamin, I'll come back to you, Gabriel.
It's not open to us to downplay the consequences of Akombe's resignation. It was done in the context of a very difficult situation, environment. She pointed out to two issues. One, which is which indicts IBC as a commission. As a constitutional commission. In fact, in our system, unlike the way some of the systems in the West, like the US, where they have inoculated politics in the electoral body, and you bring people who are known to belong to one particular formation or another so that they can check each other. In Kenya, we have a system of insulation. and you have an independent office. Commissioners serve only for a term of 6 years, non-renewable.
Yes.
So that, and then the process of removing them from is also a very laborious process that is supposed to assure of your independence while you're in that office. But Akombo was saying that there are two kinds of problems. There are problems that are external to the commission, the political actors, both Jubilee and NASA, trying to influence the commission. And then there are problems that were internal to the commission, meaning the commissioners were openly partisan, and they are trying to push partisan agenda. Let me tell you, Waihiga, that allegation, which is also supported by her memos, is not something that we may want to downplay. Chebukati's own admission a day after Akombe resigned, he said that he's been overruled many times because within the commission there's a terrible split, and people are pushing a known agenda within the commission. Now, if you look at lessons from the 2017 Supreme Court judgment, there are 3 tests, and I see IBC has already failed 1, if not 2. The Supreme Court judges said, 1, the test of compliance, that you must comply with all the laws every step of the way. Akombe seems to cast doubt on IBC's willingness to comply with the laws.
Okay.
Now, that gives NASA, if they want to go to court, or anybody wants to go to court, to test, to expose that, and also rely, those affidavits by Akombe, the communication by Akombe will be introduced in court, and the court will examine them. And the court is also not impervious to reason. And the court, unlike the rest of us who operate in this poisonous environment, the court, when in that courtroom, the court is required to have a sober and dispassionate reflection of what those memos meant. Now, if it is true that IBC deliberately refused to comply with the law, they have significantly affected the win of Uhuru Kenyatta's win. The second,
in the run-up to Thursday's poll.
And I caution Jubilee to care so much, dedicate some time to scrutinize what IBC is doing.
Right.
Because IBC will falsify your win again. Don't tell us that you as a ruling coalition, you are happy to be, you have the numbers. Jubilee kept on telling us that we know where the votes are. Of course, the votes are with the people, and they focus on the people. But you see, the pathway to accessing that vote must be paved by IBC, compliance with the laws. And if IBC neglects that, then the second issue, the court said, was the test of openness, that they're not willing to excuse IBC's opaqueness. IBC must communicate with clarity every step of the way what is innovating. Are we sure that IBC has communicated with clarity the kind of innovations that they have made, and that is satisfactory? That is a question that will be tested in court. The third and last component that I saw from the judges was that of competence. Now, the test of competence, this is a spectacular fail. Competence, even Akombe herself failed. Specifically, she failed because, sorry about that, if you are in a commission, for sure you stay on, you document, you fight, and until you make sure that you deliver. Because
will you not be also considered an accomplice if?
No. You see the way she was fighting for space in there, she needed to have continued like that. The same mistake goes for Chebukati. Now Chebukati himself has made dangerous concessions. I'm saying that deliberately because if you come out as the chair of the commission and say that I'm unable to provide direction and leadership, you are incompetent. Now, the reason why you are an advocate for 15 years, your requirements are required to match that of a Supreme Court judge, is that you're supposed to provide leadership. And even if people are communicating varied options, you're supposed to harmonize them in a way that does not displace the thoughts of other commissioners, because the commissioners are also not just there to pander to your view just because you're the chair and you're the lawyer. How you balance all this, that is the test of leadership. Can we really say that IBC, the chair, has been competent in terms of managing this election? The questions that will emerge, including Cyrus Jirongo, for instance, printing the ballot, printing his name,
first,
then gazetting later.
Yes.
I hope, what I hope the Supreme Court will consider this time also, the lesson that we've learned as a country, and I hope the court also captured it, that yes, you may require a higher standard, but when you have an electoral body that is still maturing itself, might you now care to make some reasonable accommodation? Because what I'm afraid of is this. I can tell you, Waihiga, the threshold for nullification is almost crossed. But should the court nullify that election, what is the assurance that IBC has learned? So I think this time there will be pragmatic wisdom when the court is assessing the challenges. You get, because there's a possibility of nullifying forever. So although the court said,
That is a scary statement you've made.
No, the court said, although the court said that let justice be done even if the heavens may fall,
Okay.
that we are happy to nullify as many times as is presented to us.
Right.
But now reality will also check in.
Right.
And if you see the judges also refusing to sit in this last minute petition by some civil society actors,
That's big bullies.
it's some subtle communication that, listen, we are reaching a level, unlike other matters, elections are at the center of democracy. And incubating democracy is not the role of the courts. What the court can do is to preserve it at whatever level. So this is
Okay.
what is negotiated and settled, is preserve it. Does the court really have the mandate
briefly.
to incubate Kenya's democracy? I think they're realizing that they don't have that kind of mandate. They can't do it alone. And if the Kenyans are learning gradually, then you'd rather preserve what you've assured at that other level. So I think there'll be a critical balance. There might be a shift in jurisprudence. In short, we may see that a petition which is well grounded may not succeed because of the practical realities in this country.
Of where we find ourselves as a
Very
nation. I want to
quick,
get a
let me-
comment from you, then we take a quick break and we'll come back and get closing statements, but go ahead and respond.
Very quickly, I was just finishing the argument. What I thought Akombo would have done. You remember there was a time when Parliament was inviting people to come and give views for the amendment of the electoral bill.
And we need to talk about that as
Yeah,
well.
and very quickly, when I remember the chairman went and actually he was chased to go come with the other commissioners.
Yes, he was.
Waihiga, if I was Chebukati and Akombe, that is when I would have presented that grievance. It didn't matter whether it was loop-sided, whether that hearing or whether that conglomerate was just loop-sided. One party, as people are saying.
Jubilee
I would-
legislators.
I would have presented it at that time and ensure that two people are there to cover it. Give it to the nation that we have issues that we need to work upon. Failure to which, if we go and do these mistakes again, I can guarantee you, we are going to run an election that will not be credible and will actually not hit the threshold of what the Supreme Court will call a success. And here you are not talking to, not talking to the court. Here you're talking to the people representatives who are in Parliament. I don't think at that particular time, Parliament would have had what you call a very heavy heart. What we would have done is actually set that commission, which was bipartisan anyway. Let us look into these things with sobriety. Some of the brains that were there, the likes of Sakaja, and then the people that I saw, those are some people, brilliant people who can listen from the other half of the divide. Bring in the NASA people. They are also stakeholders. Let them listen. These are the challenges that we are going through so that we don't have another election nullified. These are the challenges we are going through. How can we solve them? And I think they would have gotten an answer. If I was Akombe, I would have done it. I would have done it that way.
Let's take a quick break. When we return, I'll get closing comments from my guests here. And then after that, we'll wrap up this broadcast. You are watching Citizen TV's continuous coverage of the repeat presidential election. We are at the Bomas of Kenya, the National Tallying Center, where verification continues. We will be right back. Welcome back to Citizen TV's continuous coverage of the repeat presidential election. We are live from the Bomas of Kenya, the National Tallying Center. Can I tell you good morning, because it is Saturday, the 28th day of October 2017, and time now to get closing statements from my guests here in studio. Steve Ogolla, Advocate of the High Court, Gabriel Muthuma, Political Analyst. They have been braving the cold here with me to talk about the issues, very important and crucial issues affecting the nation. One matter that may have slipped the notice of Kenyans is that the Election Amendments Bill became law yesterday.
Yes.
It was placed before the President 2 weeks ago. That's 2 Fridays ago. He didn't sign it, but nevertheless, any matter placed before him after 14 days automatically becomes law. What effect will it have on the electoral process we find ourselves in? And of course, what is your closing statement as well as we wind up this broadcast? Gabriel, I can start with you.
Thank you. Wakili wouldn't actually know much about that when you're talking about the legal aspect of it. But somebody actually had argued, and we were just having a conversation within the effects of what that bill could do. And he was telling me at this point, I think having an election start with the previous laws, it may not do much, but I probably will have to hear what Wakili will have to say about that bill.
Okay.
But just coming to finish, I think Waihiga, I started out by saying, talking about the thuggerism and the destruction of property that we've seen. And I really wanted to talk about a place like Olympic, what we saw happen. And it does not matter what any politicians will say. Those goons knew the command that they were following. We saw the barricades of the roads. We saw, the gates in school, how crazy things happened in areas in Kibra and places in Mathare. The fact that they were following what somebody said, who happens to be a leader, is actually shameful for this nation. And we are talking about an election that has actually been capsulated and captured within our laws, where you say boycott, and then at the same breath, you allow people to go and destruct property, and then all of a sudden you come to try and redeem yourself. It is going to be unwarranted, and that behavior actually coming from leaders should stop. I wish and I hope that the two factions that we have, NASA and Jubilee, they'll be able to control their crowds. Whether it is in matters doing something right, control it, and whether it's something where your words will be interpreted to be destructive to some of the things that we've seen. Look at Kawangware, it's almost falling apart, and these are not things that we should be seeing, or we should be or should like to be talking about on air at this point. We have to continue talking about calmness and peace and reasonability and common sense to prevail. And leaders, this is the point, the politicians must stop and cut this narrative that if I cannot have it, then my brother will not have it. We need to engage the Solomonic wisdom. This country, my friend, belongs to all of us.
Fair enough. Although the exact facts about what happened in Kibra at the Olympic Primary, the Raila Education Center as well, are still out, unless you have the exact figures on who caused the destruction there.
Honestly, who was causing destructions? Sometimes you have to be
the
factual.
NASA leader has a different opinion.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who has been causing destructions. And you see, the fact that we ran away from responsibility is what sometimes is pushing us not to open a wound and clean it and have it healed properly. We know the people, and they are known, the people who are conducting destructions, who are actually going through the... Yeah, of course, you had people who wanted to vote, and those that were keeping others from voting. And that's why I talked about boycotting and disruption. These are two different animals. Are you telling me somebody who's actually willing to go out there and vote will still go out there and do and destruct property and do destruction of property and a school? Really, in Kibra, do you see? And let's be fair to the Jubilee Brigade. Let's be fair to them. Do you see them going to Kibra, Anasa zone, to cause mayhem? And also, it's like you telling me, well, they are so elated that they'll go to a place in Kiambu and destroy a school. For what reason? For what reason? No, I think common sense has to prevail. An institution like that, Waihiga, where children are going to sit for an exam in the weeks to come, they have actually already started this coming month. It is actually an aberration for leaders to even be talking about the instances of destruction at this point. It does not matter whether we are going to rebuild that wall. That is not the point. The point is to ensure that we preserve that which we've set out. Academia and academic institution must be within reach of our
I'll
hands.
have to cut you off. There's nobody here from the National Super Alliance to respond to that, but given you a chance to air your views, Steve, go ahead.
I think, Waihiga, on the election laws, first of all, those laws we said they are dead on arrival. Jubilee did not need those laws to win an election, and neither did NASA. And even if those laws were to be used, the court would find that they would not be applicable in this election. So then IBC, the court would strike out every provision that was relied on in this election, because they said conduct the election based on the constitution and applicable laws as that of that time of issuing the directive. Now, so away from those laws, I'm not worried about whether they came into force or not, and whether IBC reflected on them. I don't think IBC has committed their mind to those laws. But coming to this now, where we are as a country, the question I'd like to pose, and I think this is, if it were permissible, this is what we need to mainstream, going forward. Are we going to look for solutions within the law, or we're going to look for solutions wherever they may be found? Outside the law, within the law, wherever. So once we settle that question, that we will look for solutions within the law, then our point of departure, what does the law say? What are the limitations in the law? How can we innovate within it? And the only level of innovation in it, other than amendments to the law, is also a judicial interpretation. Let us utilize our courts the fullest, and that's why I react with shock and consternation when I see both Jubilee and NASA at various times attacking the courts. I think I feel worried, because I have contradistinguished the situation before pre-2010 and post-2010. Remember, why we are unable and we will never reach the 2007 situation is because in 2007, largely and before, the judiciary was considered a mere extension of the presidency, and it operated at the whims of the presidency. This post-2010 dispensation judiciary is what has been described as a robust, independent and functional judiciary. Right. A judiciary that can nullify a presidential election. A judiciary that is impervious to executive manipulation. Let us preserve that. Right. Because maybe Jubilee may not know. The reason why, when there's conflict and controversy, you must create an avenue for ventilation. That avenue is the judiciary. So when you see people filing the plethora of cases at the courts, actually that's a huge relief. Some of them are outrightly frivolous and only fit for dismissal. Some of them are not mature. Some of them are ill-conceived. But the fact that we have a sober and dispassionate bench, to examine and listen to us and make decisions that can bind us, the bindingness of judicial authority is what we must preserve and we must respect.
Okay.
Once we achieve that, then we'll now be examining. There are three issues, Waihiga, in this election and then going forward. Of course, the issue of legality, legitimacy, and legacy. The issue of legality has been settled because we've had an election which nobody can challenge its legality. So it's not, I hope people are saying that it's a sham election. They are saying, that's a perception. It's a perspective from one side. If you say it's sham, you must accompany that with some evidence, and the proper forum is to file an election petition.
Okay.
But the legality has been dealt with, insofar as this election was not vacated by a court of law.
Okay.
Now,
the legitimacy and the legacy.
And therefore, the product of that election is also protected by law. I mean, that's a legal fact. We can't devalue that. The legitimacy is where I urge caution. Uhuru Kenyatta must be magnanimous in his approach. I know he made some comments that he's willing to talk to Raila. I hope he activates that comment, because to get political legitimacy, there's that the legal legitimacy, because he went through a process sanctioned by law, campaigned, and he was elected at the ballot. If you have a problem, present it to court. In fact, even going to court may actually even validate his win even more, because eventually when the court say we don't have a problem with the results as declared, then now that reinforces his win and solidifies his position as the president, and therefore also closes the discussion for a new election. But the legacy, the legitimacy aspect.
Yes, before you get to the legacy.
Surely it can't be lost on Uhuru Kenyatta that if he's going to govern this country, he will need all the 45 million plus. Right. If he attempts this if he carries the grandstanding that we saw in the political campaign, it will be more harmful to his presidency than it can be beneficial. You remember, the political opposition have nothing to lose. They are not in government. As long as they want to peacefully demonstrate,
yes,
you must make it possible for dialogue to occur, find out what can be solved and what can be solved.
I need to allow you to make your closing statement.
The last part, which is the legacy. I'm sure now the legacy politics, because if Uhuru Kenyatta is able to succeed himself for the second term, surely, President Kibaki, many things may be taken away from him. But what can be taken from him is the fact that he was development oriented.
Right.
And he triggered the kind of development, the infrastructure development that we see today. And when you see this kind of infrastructure development, you think about Kibaki. What is Uhuru's legacy? You get? So the legacy politics, he must be careful to tamper legalities, legitimacy questions with his own legitimacy concerns, because we'll see a lot of legitimacy politics. In fact, after he's sworn in, there's a probable chance that some of the people in Jubilee may actually now begin to build alliances with NASA. And then, so if he's not a statesman, I think in these last 5 years, he needs to emerge as a statesman, unite the country, and make sure that once we are done with the election, because right now emotions are high,
Right.
and feel, elections are quite divisive,
And an emotive
very divisive,
yeah.
deeply divisive, and also emotive. But once we get past that, we must cancel ourselves out of that reality that now we are beyond election. How to cancel ourselves out of that reality? We'll be watching what Uhuru is saying,
Okay.
not what Raila is saying. If he's responding to Raila so much, instead of just speaking as a statesman, he will lose the point and he will lose the focus.
Okay.
I believe that is what we need going forward, and for political stability to be there in this country.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve Ogolla. Many thanks indeed, an advocate of the High Court, Gabriel Muthuma, a political analyst. That is how we wrap up this broadcast. Many thanks to all of you who stayed up late, or should I say early, watching this broadcast, wherever you're watching us from, Kenya, East Africa, around the world. We have been live from the Bomas of Kenya, the National Tallying Center. We know that for the better part of this morning, verification has still been ongoing at the auditorium just behind us. Nevertheless, the commissioners have left. They will not be making any more announcements tonight. That will continue tomorrow. That's how we wrap up this broadcast. My name is Waihiga Mwaura. Many thanks for keeping it Citizen TV. Stay with us over the next couple of days as we continue to update you on the repeat presidential election. But for now, have a good night.